many ships and dredges over the years.
Our mission specifically was to make sure that the dredges were safe.
And so everybody here, didn't matter what hours they had to put in, how many days a week, how to work.
At one time, it was probably one of the busiest places at the Corps of Engineers in the Portland District.
Everybody really just pooled together, made sure that the job got done.
The United States Army Corps of Engineers presents the U.S. Government Moorings, Portland, Oregon. Looking back, moving forward. The Pacific Northwest waterways are major arterials for trade and commerce. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began rivers and harbors improvements in the Pacific Northwest in 1866, 5 years before establishing its Portland Engineers office. The Columbia River, in particular, was identified as a key regional waterway. Its improvement to navigation for deep water craft is of the utmost importance for the entire Northwest, whose inhabitants find the natural outlet for their produce through the valley of the Columbia. Over the next 3 decades, Corps engineers surveyed local rivers and rapids and provided dredging, snagging, rock removal, and bank protection. Keeping the rivers clear and passable for ever-increasing shipments of grain and other products meant keeping up with the accumulation of sediment and debris that clogged the channels. This required a fleet of dredges and other vessels, and a facility where they could be serviced and repaired.
Oh, the smell of this place, the smell of the machine shop, the oil and the burnt metal.
The U.S. Government Moorings, the only government facility of its kind in the Pacific Northwest.
Our mission specifically was to make sure that the dredges were safe for the sailors operating them and were reliable, and try to get that reliability in the most cost-effective way.
The first parcels of land for the moorings were purchased in 1903 on the west bank of the Willamette River, 6.5 miles downriver from Portland. That same year, the first hydraulic dredge, Chinook, was put in service, and in 1904, 4 more boats were commissioned. Maintaining these and future vessels required workspaces and buildings to house specialized equipment. The moorings grew from 1911 to 1945. Machine and blacksmith shops, docks, crane housings, and warehouses were built, all designed to support the Corps' dredging and navigation mission. One of the oldest buildings still on the site is the welding shop. Built in 1917, the east end of the building was originally used as a blacksmith shop, while the rest was and still is used as a welding shop. While some of the moorings' early structures have been removed and renovated, the look and feel of the site remains true to its surroundings in this industrial waterfront location. One of the largest Portland District rivers and harbors projects involved constructing the jetties at the mouth of the Columbia River. Known as the Graveyard of the Pacific, the bar at the mouth of the Columbia River is one of the most treacherous for mariners transiting between the Pacific Ocean and the river. A system of jetties was built to overcome the hazards to ships attempting to cross the bar at the river's mouth. Construction of the South Jetty began in 1885. The North Jetty was completed in 1917. The rubble mound structures are designed to absorb the Pacific's powerful waves, redirect currents, and calm the water for ships, fishing boats, and other vessels as they transit to harbors and inland waterways. When they were built, the jetties at the mouth of the Columbia River were the largest in the world and provided a depth of 40 feet across the entrance. But there was still more work to be done. The river is not now available for vessels of larger ocean draft to Portland, and on this account it is widely claimed that considerable transport and other business has been lost to this community. To address the problem of access to Portland, a plan was approved in 1912 to establish a navigation channel on the Willamette and the Columbia from Portland to the sea, 300 feet wide and 30 feet deep. In 1914, 2 24-inch pipeline dredges, Multnomah and Wahkiakum, were obtained to do the bulk of the dredging.
A pipeline dredge is a barge, and on that barge is mounted a large pump and an engine to drive the pump. The pump then pumps the slurry up the pipe, and then it goes out the back of the dredge on a floating pipeline usually, and then pumps it up on the bank. There were 3 or 4 or 5 of those that worked here up through the 1972.
the dredging operations had the intended impact on the economy.
The U.S. Moorings was integral to the economic development through navigation.
The value of total cargo more than doubled from 1921 to 1926. Lumber exports increased by 5 times, and more wood products moved from Portland than any other city in the world. The Portland District also conducted major operations on the Oregon coast. Jetties and shipping channels were constructed to improve ship access to various harbors. By 1912, the Corps had invested about $3.2 million to carry out the work on the coast. After the work was done and jetties were completed, regular, sometimes annual dredging was required to maintain the project depths.
As we dredged those channels for the imports and exports, and we developed the markets all around the world, really, the vessels and the dredges that dug the channels and the people who maintained the vessels who dug the channels were all centered there.
Major expansion of the moorings facilities first occurred in 1917, following construction of the North Jetty. Between 1940 and 1945, as part of the Portland District's civil and military work during World War II, structures and machinery were added to the moorings.
There was a kind of a buildup before World War II because the dredges did go to war. The Harding was over in Europe. The Pacific went to the Pacific, and the Mackenzie, the dredge I was on in Galveston, was in the Pacific. And they dredged sometimes where there were mines and unexploded ordnance and things, and it was kind of dangerous.
Among the new buildings was the machine shop. Built in 1944, it still serves its original function. It also houses the original Detroit 10-ton traveling crane, which spans the upper portion of the room. New and original machinery work side by side to maintain the Corps' small fleet.
All these pipes and valves you see in this machine shop are under repair because the material that the dredges pick up off the bottom is very abrasive. It's going about 20 feet per second through those pipes, and it's just wearing everything out. So our main job was to make sure that there were spare parts of everything that is a wearing part, up to and including rudders and propellers, anything that's out there that can be bounced off the bottom. We make sure that all of that is ready to go with spares. Also, the ship itself, just because of the fact that they're out on the ocean, is constantly being exposed to salt water, and there's rust going on, and so things deteriorate just as a matter of course.
At the height of its activity, the moorings supported more than 20 major vessels, including survey boats, diesel tugs, drill barges, and pipeline, hopper, and bucket dredges. The best known of the pipeline dredges were the Multnomah and Wahkiakum, both commissioned in 1914, and the Lucky Mute, built in 1944. The most famous of the hopper dredges included the Mitchie, the Pacific, the Chinook, the Biddle, and the Harding.
A hopper dredge is a ship, and in that ship there are hoppers that are big bins, and in the bottom there's a door. So they have pumps inside, and they pump material up through these drag heads.
They move up and down the Columbia River at about a mile per hour, and they suck the material up through the pumps and into the hopper.
Sediment removed from the Federal Navigation Channel is either placed in the flow channel nearer to the riverbank or transported to a designated ocean placement site. Depending on the hopper's capacity and the amount of shoaling, dredging projects could take several days to complete. During the dredging season, the ships are at work 24/7.
So when something happens, the ship has to go down for any reason, they have to get that repaired right away because the mission can't really stop, right? You only have so many good weather days to work on these ocean entrances.
2 docks at the moorings were built between 1914 and the late 1930s. These structures provided not just mooring for the dredges, but in 1940 it began supporting the dock derrick house and a 50-ton crane. The small 400-foot square derrick house was built on what was known as Dock A. This structure, removed in 2015 to make way for a new dock, was a 2-story house containing all the controls, levers, and cables for crane operation. The derrick house operated in its original function until 2008, using the same machinery for operating the original 50-ton derrick. an electric-powered stiff-leg steel crane that was transferred to the Portland District in 1941. The riveted steel lattice behemoth was a 75-foot boom operated on a 16-foot diameter bull wheel. It was equipped with 2 load hooks on cables, one for lifting up to 50 tons and the other for lighter lifting up to 12 tons.
On that crane there, back in the 80s and the early 90s, we would use it to pick up our survey boats. Those boats, they weighed 35 ton, one weighed 40 ton.
Typical of many crane installations, the Moorings derrick crane was a refabrication and retrofitting from an existing crane made by the Willamette Iron and Steel Company.
Larry Garnett's the one that taught me how to run that crane, and just the dynamics of that crane and the foot pedals, and how you have to know which one to put in friction wise and which brake to put in place, make sure that your dog is put in on your drum.
The original dock where the crane and its housing sat was built in 1914. It was rebuilt in 1940 when the crane was erected by the Gilpin Construction Company of Portland. To support the massive machine, Gilpin built 3 individual concrete foundations. Those foundations were supported by 3 massive concrete piers, a foundation that provided access to the ships for servicing and supported safe crane operation.
Always safety first. If the wind get up to or over 20 miles an hour, all crane operations stopped. There was a wind gauge out there on the dock crane, at the top of the dock crane, a wind gauge. So we'd look and see what the wind was doing.
There's just so many things that happen on that crane that you really have to be on your game. Otherwise, if you pull the wrong lever, of course, or release the wrong friction, you can be releasing, the other hook or, cause issues.
Over time, the Moorings has also been the site of other Portland District activities. The warehouses have supported logistics operations, a hydraulic laboratory where engineers constructed and tested scale models of Bonneville Dam's spillway gates. Through the years, the Moorings has withstood the ravages of floods as the mighty Columbia and Willamette rivers surged during storms.
In 1948, there was a flood here, flooded this place probably up to our waist in this room. And then in 1964, there was a flood. And in 1996, there was a flood. The Aquina was tied up out there in 1996. I was here, and you were looking up at the ship because the water was so high.
So in 96, I got here right after the flood had happened, and the docks down below, all the catwalks, and all the piping down underneath the dock had, got wet. So we worked for quite a long time on, rehabbing all those walkways and catwalks and all the piping to get new air, new steam lines down so that we can get the ships, back up and going.
It was pretty incredible. Those floods were pretty intense events, and there was a lot of cleanup afterward, and in order to try and get this place up and running again, because our support job doesn't stop.
By the 1960s, changes in the Portland District's mission and the increased contracting out of work reduced the need for certain facilities at the Moorings, and a number of buildings were removed between 1961 and 1967. Beginning in the 1980s, the Corps of Engineers increasingly contracted out its dredging activities, which greatly reduced the workload at the Moorings. This policy change resulted from the efforts to downsize the federal government by privatizing various government functions.
And so we went from there into the period of largely maintenance dredging, and the Corps reduced its fleet to 10 dredges, 4 of which are hopper dredges.
By the end of the 20th century, the Moorings supported the work of just 2 large government-owned dredges, the Helens and the Aquina, 4 hydrosurvey vessels, and other small craft.
Everybody knew the mission, and so the machinists did their part, and the welders did their part, and materials handling and the electronic shop got very important towards the end because the ships are just very dense with electronics.
In the days before cell phones and GPS, the team at the electronic shop at the Moorings also built and maintained the VHF radio system that allowed the ships to communicate.
The way the ships communicated with each other and the way the survey vessels used to communicate to the moorings and to the ships was through what we called the radio backbone.
In our heyday here, we had over 300 mobile radios out.
The radio system and all the personnel at the Moorings would face one of their greatest challenges in May of 1980. The eruption of Mount St. Helens sent cascades of rock, sand, and silt pouring into the Toutle River, and then the Cowlitz, and then into the Columbia.
During the Mount St. Helens eruptions, the Columbia River went to 16 feet in 12 hours or something, you know, some very small amount of time.
I remember sitting over here and working on my bench and listening to the hydrosurvey guys reporting down around Longview depths of 7 feet, 8 feet.
The debris even went upstream a mile and filled the channel.
The channel was blocked. There was no way to get ships up or down because that was the place where you couldn't get past.
Dredges from the Corps of Engineers and the Port of Portland were the first to arrive and begin digging out the navigation channel.
And so the Biddle, the Pacific, and the Harding were all dredging, which is very unusual. They were all dredging right together. And I think it took them about a month or less, and they got the channel open again.
That in those days, the cell phones like we have today just weren't in existence. So they really depended on the VHF, the district radio system. And we were able to connect back into the Portland district office, which was kind of nice because it gave people in town here the ability to directly communicate with the work going on, you know, at Mount St. Helens.
The Essions and Yaquina are the only Corps dredges working on the West Coast. The ships and their crews maintain the federal navigation channels from Grays Harbor, Washington to Morro Bay, California, Alaska to Hawaii. Usually it's routine maintenance.
During the Exxon Valdez crisis, the Essions and Yaquina went up to assist.
The cleanup in Alaska resulted in the dredges recovering nearly 400,000 gallons of oil from the waters of Prince William Sound.
They were used as command centers, and also they developed a way to turn their drag heads over and suck oil.
I got the sales radio officer on board the Yaquina, and that was something I'd always wanted to do. I'm into ham radio and all that, so I could do the Morse code and back in those days that was required for the shipboard stuff. But it was impressive that we did get involved and were able to respond and actually make an impact up there.
The U.S. Moorings in Portland has a storied past, instrumental in the growth of the economy of the Northwest, opening the way for our products to reach the world, and providing safe passage for the goods of the world to reach us. After floods and volcanic eruptions, a century and more of service, the Moorings is changing. Changes in the service needs, technology, and environmental regulations have made it difficult to keep buildings and structures as they were originally used and functioned.
The mission has changed so much, but the equipment and the people and the things that we use now have also changed and moved along with it.
A number of buildings will be demolished. The iconic symbol of the Moorings, the stiff-leg derrick crane, was last operated in 2008 and removed in 2015 to make way for a new dock with a new design.
Our dock front has to change because of the environmental concerns in the river. Our operations are pretty clean, but we need to do cleanup.
The redesigned dock will include a wharf and approach pier that will accommodate the dredges. There will also be a floating dock for the hydrosurvey vessels. The structures are designed to support the next 50 years of operations at the Moorings.
We can't build the docks back the way they were. For all of those reasons, you know, the moorings and the mission there will change just a little bit.
I've walked out on that pier so many times when the ships used to be here before, when we could tie them up here. It's an important mission, it's an important place.
As the Corps navigation mission continues to evolve in the 21st century, so do the structures that support the fleet and its workforce.
You lose a little bit of the romance of the past, I guess, but you embrace the future because we'll be a little more efficient and a little more environmentally friendly.